we're continuing now looking specifically at ESG and how we can turn it into a more operational and really successful part of the whole company operations. I'm joined by Todd Simms, who is from FourKites, and Steve Beda, who is from Trax. And Todd, Steve, thank you very much for joining me. And I would like to probably the first question we'll go with Todd is, how should we understand ESG? There seems to be this look that it's something very strategic, but can we actually turn it into something more operational?
No. I think it's a great question to start with, for sure. I also feel like specifically within supply chain, I'm a former practitioner myself, but the big push around ESG, obviously it took off, 2-3 years ago, and that's all you heard about. Executive compensations tied to ESG performance, and huge push, big numbers that were set out there. And I feel like we're at a new fork in the road where a lot of folks have taken pause to say, okay, well, hold on, we really got to feel what's realistic here and what's not, so we can report back out, and not necessarily to the street, but also to the commitment of our employees. Like, where are we headed as an organization? So I think operationally, really making very easy is the wrong word, I think tangible goals to achieve, that provides a level of continuity and sustainability within your sustainability goals, right? And I think that change is taking place right now. In the beginning, there was a lot of goals around, okay, we're focused on the Paris Treaty, so it's 2050. And I think that's too far in the future. It's what can we do now? And I'm a big believer. I'm not necessarily a big believer in the paper straw, if you will, saying that that's the focus, but more, what can we do in a supply chain around efficiency, standardization, and how can technology enable us? That alone provides a level of focus operationally that I think you can achieve some of those goals. And I think you're seeing a lot of organizations make significant strides there, where the balance does become, how do we maintain these operational goals and still be a profitable company for the long term? And I think that was always the rub. How do we do this in the right way, right? We can't do 30-40% of our private fleets, as an example, on EV just because the cost structure is just not there. The infrastructure is not there. So where are the areas that we can really attack? So I think, you're seeing this from an operational perspective of folks really not hiding, but finding, deeply discovering those opportunities operationally, more from an efficiency perspective. And it goes well beyond just, routes and lanes and stuff like that. It's the products we're delivering. When you see that come, I think the word that Ball Corporation uses a lot is design fully circular products. Is that an opportunity? So I think you're seeing that change take place, where the realities finally come into fruition for a lot of folks to go, how can we attack this on a consistent basis versus this arbitrary number that's many, many years down the road that it's really hard to see the impact we're making there.
And I'll bring Steve here from Trax. In one of the previous conversations, you mentioned the word data. And I think this is really connected to operations and becoming more practical and realistic. How much data do we need to have to make it real and possible as an ESG goal?
I think it's a great question. And I'll just kind of carry the conversation forward from where Todd left it. So I'm going to give some examples, but everything we do relates to having data fundamentally to make good decisions, okay? Tracking those decisions, being able to monitor. I remember many years ago, you were lucky if you knew if a carrier was part of in the US, for instance, SmartWay, right, was an organization. So you gave maybe some credence to picking a carrier over another because of that. Today's world is more complex. So truly creating actionable data requires scope 1, 2, and 3 tracking and traceability. And specifically around scope 3, I think it's more difficult because you have third parties like asset carriers and LSPs as part of your overall supply chain. So getting consistent data for scope 3 is really challenging for companies. So fundamentally, you have to capture all that information, and then you need to baseline it. Once you baseline it, it gives you the ability to know where I am. So it's always, what's my current state and where do I want to go with my target and goals that are realistic? I think one of the nice things, and Todd mentioned it as a balance, is there are really 3 things about the supply chain. There's cost to serve, there's service, and now there's sustainability. All 3 may not all be 100% aligned, but typically they are. So for instance, modal optimization, using the right asset carrier, using a carrier that produces less CO2 because they better manage their fleet. Shipment consolidation, using, for instance, the right optimization of load, utilization of asset and things like that. They not only lower the cost to serve, but they also reduce carbon emissions. So I like to use the word cake and eat it too. I think it's realistic to say that you can balance these things and achieve multiple goals, not only reducing cost, maintaining service levels, but also reducing carbon emissions. And I think that Todd's comment about the fork in the road, we now have the data to support that. And to me, that's really operational utilization and the execution and strategy of the company in terms of supply chain logistics. So you got to have the data, though, to measure it. You have to have it to baseline it. You have to know what decisions you're making are truly reducing cost to serve, as well as maintaining service and lowering CO2 over the time frame and targets which you have set.
And a question, again, obviously for both, but how many mature organizations are out there that understand ESG as something which can lower the cost, but also increase profits eventually?
There's plenty of examples out there, and they're large, obviously global organizations, your Unilevers of the world, Schneider Electrics, and there's obviously some high-tech organizations out there too that do really, really well with it. But to Steve's point, it is about the data, and a lot of organizations I would consider fall into two categories. You're either data rich or you're data obese, right? So you don't have the ability to consume and digest the data to make sense of it. And I would also say on that same point around data, it has to be in a real-time component, because the one thing about sustainability, it cannot be a hope in the sense of our goals are X and we're not going to look at it for 12 months or even 3 months for that matter. You should be able to look at it month over month, maybe even week over week, to say, are we directionally doing what we said we were going to do? Why not? And you can even hold your suppliers accountable in that same manner, which I think is an excellent point that Steve made too. The one thing I would just add to that piece is that we are seeing another transition take place within supply chain. When the chief sustainability officer role came out, sometimes it reported into the chief supply chain officer, sometimes the CEO. We are seeing that shift, though. A lot of those responsibilities are reporting directly into supply chain, which I think is absolutely critical to make significant material impact to the bottom line on this piece.
Couldn't agree more, Todd. And again, scope 3, the hard one, right? It's all your carriers, your suppliers that aren't inside the four walls. Consistently measuring that is not easy. If you're not an early adopter of data management, decision support through systemic capture, frequent cadent usage of the data to make corrective actions, then if you're waiting for some sort of regulation to occur to mandate it, it's probably too late.
Yep, absolutely. And it's interesting because in supply chain, we're really good at coming up with new nomenclature, right? Agility, resiliency, those kind of things. The new word out there now is transparency. I think that one's going to stick because that transparency allows for both inbound and execution as well as outbound accountability. That's going to be the really interesting change. That level of accountability is going to be, you talk about from a profitability perspective to supplier relationships to talent resource, talent retention. It's all going to be intertwined there. The folks that are able to, again, adopt this data, consume it, digest it, and be transparent with it, those are the ones you're going to see winning in the turns in the sustainability journey for certain.
And one thing I also want to bring here is the uniqueness of the goals, and should each individual company in a way reinvent the wheel every single time they look into ESG, sustainability, traceability, visibility, and all of the things that you mentioned. How unique should our goals be? And is there a template or a framework that can fit everyone?
So everybody starts at a different place, first of all. And like we already talked about, being an early adopter of transparency, data collection, and good data analytics is key here. But in terms of the journey, that's why I talked about baselining. Everyone starts from a certain place. Where that place is determined on where your baseline is. To me, setting goals, there are long-term goals and there are short-term goals, maybe some medium-term goals in there as well. But the key is it has to be realistic. To me, knowing where your baseline is, knowing what opportunity exists, and again, I'm including cost to serve in here as well. I've worked with a lot of companies to lower cost to serve by 5%, let's say over a year-to-year basis, or 10%. Okay, how are you going to do that? Well, then you have to break it down into the levers you could pull to do that. Use different carriers, negotiate better pricing, et cetera, et cetera. ESG is the same way. You have to set realistic target goals, monitor those, maybe stair step those as in smaller incremental achievements in the short term. As you get better at the data and looking at the data and understanding how to use the data, you could set more aggressive goals, ultimately targeting a long-term goal that reduces overall carbon output or CO2e, whatever you're measuring it in terms of the ESG program, by X amount by a long-term date. But the key is, I think Todd said it in the beginning, you just can't set a long-term goal without realistic sort of measuring milestones to get there. That's the key to me. So Todd?
Yeah, no, 1,000% agree. I mean, you've already talked about the idea of benchmarking your supply chain to understand your carbon emissions and your decarbonization strategy. Super critical. And there's no one size fits all. I mean, products you produce, suppliers that you have to use potentially. I mean, have you done nearshoring efforts? Maybe, maybe not. Where do you sit globally? There's a lot of things that go into the algorithm to really determine where you sit. I'm with Steve, though. You've got to create measurable goals for a number of reasons, right? There's the external factor, because you could get called out for greenwashing, right? Like you said this, and then you had to buy carbon credits. I mean, it's not going to be far-fetched for people to be able to read your 10K and understand what you have or have not done. And then there's internally, right? At the end of the day, I believe all companies want to do the right thing. And they're just trying to find balance. And do we have a roadmap that supports where we're trying to go? So let's baseline, benchmark where we are, current state, understand desired state, and what's in between. And there's a digitization factor. There's all these other factors. And again, a lot of organizations, they're going to sit different in that maturity curve. And it's really going to determine how far they can go and how quick they can go.
And I also, before we, in a way, wrap up the conversation, but I wanted to look into examples of companies that you think have, if not achieved it really, are at least certainly on the right path. And as far as you can obviously share with us some projects that you think have shown how it can be done the right way. Todd?
Yeah, I've got a couple. I mean, we've had some case studies and publications out there specifically regarding a Cardinal Healthcare as an example, right? They had an 11-year corporate strategy around sustainability that they were going down, and they wanted to have that completed by 2030, right? So they really understood early the impact of sustainability, and they wanted to make it a strategic imperative, which they've done a very good job in. The other piece was, do they have accurate data around their emissions? So if today it's X and tomorrow needs to be Y, we really need to understand the reductions we're making there. And we have a sustainability dashboard that they utilize, so they're able to see their routes and lanes and understand that footprint and those emissions that they're able to decrease. And I think that's just an excellent journey that they've been on, and it's going to continue for sure. So it's obviously part of their DNA, and I think that's why they've made some significant changes. The other two that I'll bring up, one is a local company here in Colorado, but Ball Corporation. I've always been fascinated with their model, right? The whole idea of designing fully circular products, the infinite recyclability of aluminum. I think one of their taglines is you could take a drink out of a soda can, and in 2 weeks later, you could potentially have that same soda can in a different soda. I love that idea of how that works. And you can really lean into the tangibility of that, right? It's very real. Another one is Beda Crop Science. I mean, they have very, very aggressive goals. They understand the impact to the environment. Obviously, they're in the agriculture world. So the impact that they make, it's well beyond their organization. They're impacting their customers who are farmers. They're impacting their employees. And they've got very aggressive short-term goals that tie to long-term strategy. And I think they've done a really good job with that as well. Those would be the three that I would mention today.
And Steve, on your side?
Yeah, you know what's interesting, you mentioned some life science there. Our pharma customers are early adopters of these strategies. That's an interesting takeaway, by the way. But just some recent examples of this is we work with our customers on network optimization. We had mentioned a little bit about that's one of those have cake and eat it too, right? You want to keep the total distance on the network down to lower cost to serve, but also it obviously reduces CO2. The interesting fact is normally when we do these network optimization studies in supporting our customers, it's all about lowering cost to serve only or maintaining service. Now there's a third element. So what we're able to do now with the data is say, you not only can lower the cost to serve by moving some supply closer to the distribution, but also the carbon impact of making those same changes. And that they came to us and asked for this information. So again, I've been in consulting for years on these projects, and it's never been sort of a three measurements. It's always been two. Interesting. Now they're saying, oh, I want to know, because again, my stakeholders are asking. They're asking, can I reduce the cost? Can I maintain a service level that's reasonable for the supply chain to meet its requirements for our customers, especially in pharmaceuticals? But also, can I reduce, what's the impact of the carbon emissions on that same work? That has not been in the past sort of the third question asked, and it is now. And so it's very relevant, and it supports our conversation about really operationalizing the information and using it to support initiatives and having verifiable results that the C-level, various management, and even stakeholders or stockholders or shareholders or customers could also appreciate in terms of supply chain optimization.
I was just going to say real quick on that. We've talked so much about data, and all the companies we just mentioned, as far as where they are in their sustainability journey, have an ability to disseminate that data across all parts of the organization. I mean, that has a different level of momentum. The snowball effect is there, and I think that's super interesting. As you mentioned, nearshoring and the whole network optimization, and what are we doing with that data? I mean, disseminating it, the ability to do that is so critical too.
Well, thank you very much both. For everyone watching, we will be continuing the conversations both with FourKites as well as Trax on not just on ESG, sustainability, but on many other things that FourKites and Trax work on. Steve, Todd, thank you very much, and we will continue shortly with more things on ESG. Thank you.
Thank you.